Hey, good morning from Japan. Crisp December 29th morning, 13 degrees Celsius, feeling good. Anonymous, you ask a brilliant question, one of the biggest questions there is. You say that the love you feel for your children is the closest that you can get to this feeling of a higher power. And you ask how you can possibly know that that's a spiritual connection and not just your evolutionary brain doing what it's supposed to be doing. How? How to know this? And it's a question that entire departments of philosophy keep themselves open on. We're living in a time when words are getting mangled by memes and sound bites, and perhaps more importantly, a lack of will to get our hands dirty by digging under the surface of these memes and sound bites. Definitions are arbitrarily assigned. Meaning has become almost entirely dependent on personal experience, and that's all right. That's all right, kinda. The investigation and contemplation of reality, however, right, is not a new pursuit. And no matter the field of interest, be it psychology or mysticism or shamanism or yoga or Aristotelian metaphysics, real philosophers who seek to understand the meaning of reality, they do this by asking precise questions. Ontology is referring to questions that concern the fundamental nature of reality and existence itself. Epistemology concerns, more importantly, the question of how we know anything in the first place and how we can test what we think we know. Right? This, I think, is what you're after, the evidence. Phenomenology, right, questions the nature of conscious experience, whether the content of our personal experience actually does, in fact, give way to more enduring truth. And of these three pursuits to real knowledge, the question of how we can investigate what we know and whether there is even such a thing as certain knowledge should be of the primary concern. So, way to go, you. Bless your integrity. That is the primary question, how I can test this line of inquiry. This question, as it relates to the classical wisdom traditions, the time-tested, time-honored traditions, time-tested because they work, because they've delivered, they've enabled the spiritual practitioner to reap the fruit of their practice. And so these traditions have endured. But there's a scholar in particular whom I'm thinking of who wrote an essay called The Essence of the Tantras. And he tells us in there that this process of creative contemplation or holistic meditative inquiry that leads to experiential knowing of reality is going to be based on three supports. And that is the sound and careful reflection of your experience, the guidance of a great teacher who's skilled in meditative inquiry and has attained its fruit, and the wisdom of the time-tested scholarship or the time-tested scriptures, the time-honored ones. When these three come together in agreement, we can know that we've arrived at something that we can call truth. And the author of that essay suggests that just one or two of those three supports is not enough for us to be absolutely certain of our conclusions. It's like the certainty of the love that you feel for your child, the love that I feel for my child. It's my experience. I am very certain of it, but what does it tell me except that I love my child, that I am in love? Part of the premise or the origin story of the wisdom traditions is that this original source, which nobody can identify because it is original source, it is unbounded, limitless, unidentifiable, unimaginable, infinite, somehow, some way invested itself with limitation in order that one become two. that source become force and energetically manifest out into the universe. It's a brilliant origin story. But they, the ubiquitous they, the sages, they say that this source invested itself knowingly and willfully with a great love in order that the ground of being become. And so the ground of being was based in love and freedom. It went forth and created everything now that we call reality and base our lives on today. This story, it's just a story, is part of the scripture, and this would be a further support of the experience that you speak about now, the love that you feel for your children. Yes, all of the wisdom traditions suggest that love is God, that love is the evidence of spirituality. A hallmark of the Indian philosophy is the willingness to remain open to possibility, particularly when faced with the vastness of the eternal, underscoring the view of unity consciousness. And one of the issues that we face with the direct experience argument for certain truth is found in the conclusions that we're tempted to draw, however logically invalid. Hence, this system of checks and balances in answer to the common trigger defenses of my experience, my truth, right? Recall the list mentions experience first in the process of attaining to truth. However, with the understanding that the conclusions inferred from said experience will necessarily be invalid until unless corroborated by trustworthy sources of the highest integrity. This question, it touches on the deepest philosophical and psychological, spiritual, theological concepts. Evidence for a higher self, right? What a big ask. The spiritual traditions in the East and West suggest the existence of a higher self, a higher consciousness. And we've all moved forward on these suggestions. The higher self is thought to transcend the ego, thought to transcend the personal identity, thought to represent a deeper, universal aspect of the self. Experiential evidence through practices like meditation and contemplation and altered states of consciousness are interpreted as contact with a higher self, the key word being interpretation. And these experiences are described as a sense of oneness or unity with existence. When we talk about evidence from a psychological perspective, especially in Jungian terms, right? There's the concept of the self that represents the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious elements of the individual. And Jung believed and devoted 60 odd years of his life to theorizing and creating a mode of interaction with being based on his beliefs. And now we do the same thing based on his beliefs. And he coined a term called individuation, the process of becoming whole, which involves recognizing and integrating this higher self. However, this is a psychological construct rather than a metaphysical claim, but it is still just a construct. And long story short, no matter which wisdom tradition we engage with, no matter which spiritual practice we engage in, no matter which school of philosophy we devote years of our time to, the long and short of it is, there is only one self, being compartmentalized by many, many brilliant ideas. And we do tend to compartmentalize our experience, but there is only one. And they say quite clearly that oneness is what we are after in the first place, right? So how did one become two? except by knowledge and will. The origin stories warn us, don't eat the apple and make one into two. No, come back to still point. See, in fact, you are one. Stop making such stories about this and that, this and that. In fact, it is one great love. And the love that you feel, I believe, to be the closest thing that anybody can ever come to what we call spirituality. Spirituality equals love, and reality really is one love. Higher self, lower self, this self, that self. What a big ball of confusion. Of course you are higher self. Of course you have all of the Maslowian needs competing with each other at the same time. It's a really, really great investigation, this investigation into reality. I love it. I've devoted my entire life to it, and now I teach the wisdom practices too. It's a great, great life and a great, great question, Mama. Good stuff, good stuff. Keep doing what you're doing and being as a being and looking for that evidence, questioning. It's deep, deep integrity that pushes you on. Nicely done. Merry Christmas. Happy, happy 2025 coming.